podcast. My name is
This
Andy,
is Lou
and this is
Elizondo,
the
and
ever
you are
popular
listening to
listener
That
call-in
UFO
show.
Podcast.
There are 2 of these for August. This is part 1. Part 2 isn't fully ready yet, as I'm recording a few more of those calls today. If you want to get involved on the listener call-in, please email me at ufouapam@gmail.com. I'll put the link in the description, and we can arrange a time. You come on, record for 10-15 minutes about whatever you want to talk about to do with the UFO subject, and we can use it on the show. On this one, we've got 3 listeners, some of which you may be familiar as they submit questions pretty regular. We're talking about the UFO nuclear connection, we're talking about distrust of the CIA, and we're talking about military kids whose parents are in the military and maybe know more than they've let on over the years. Lots of great stuff to come this month as well. Obviously, we're ramping up to Lou Elizondo's book coming out towards the end of August, which is going to be a huge topic of discussion. So I've asked some of the listeners a little bit about what they expect from that as well. Anyway, enough from me. Here is part 1 of the listener call-in. And don't forget, if you want to sign up to support me in the podcast, you can use Patreon, where there is a couple of weeks free trial. You can use Apple. There's a couple of weeks free trial on there as well. Spotify Premium has the video content on there too. Or if you prefer just watching the videos, you can sign up for a YouTube membership. So thank you very much, folks, and on with the listener call-in. Joining me now on, let's call it line 1, even though I don't have lines, I'd always wanted to say that. I've got Peter in Devon in England. Hi, Peter, how you doing?
I'm doing fine. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks for asking. Now, Peter, listen, this is the listener call-in. It's not about me, it's about the listeners. The floor is yours. So what was it you want to talk about?
Okay, well, I think we can take it as a starting premise that NHI are here, that we're well aware of it. We've either directly experienced it, we can see it. And I was inspired recently by seeing a separate podcast, The Diary of a CEO with Stephen Bartlett, and he was interviewing Annie Jacobsen, who's talking about nuclear war, which is it sounds like a completely different subject, but it's strongly related, I think. She also wrote about Area 51, incidentally, and the Roswell incident. But very sobering, because we seem to have blanked for some time the fact that we have nukes and that we're angry monkeys waving them around at each other, and that for many, many years, humanity teetered on the verge of annihilation, and it continues to be the case. So what does that mean? We opened Pandora's box when we created the first nukes. We've moved on to thermonuclear devices, which are massively more powerful than the atom bombs that dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And there's something of an exponential distribution of likelihood that we will annihilate ourselves at some point in the future. And strangely, at that point, there's Roswell, there's allegations of conversations between senior members of the US government and aliens and what have you. And I wondered about why those two things, and also why there is such a tremendous Herculean effort to keep a lid on the phenomenon, basically. Because something is happening, something is going on as a result of this phenomenon being visible to all of us, but they're trying to keep a lid on it. And it's not just about the fact that they've taken millions of dollars, trillions of dollars, I should say, and spent them on stuff. It's that or for that matter, that they've done really nasty stuff, that they've discredited people, they've killed people, perhaps. That they've put out disinformation, that they've forced people out of office or whatever. It is that there is something more behind this. And the only thing I could think of was if you were faced with an understanding from your mathematicians and game theorists that there is no way of winning a nuclear war, and that all it takes is for someone to screw up and start lobbing a nuke on the basis of I can't remember the name of the film now, but on the basis of a war game. Oh, War Games. There you go. That's what it was called.
Yeah, I remember it. Yeah.
It just, all it takes is an accident, and all of a sudden humanity's wiped off the face of the earth. So if you're, I don't know, Eisenhower or someone like that in that era, and you've come to that understanding, you've just come out of a war, and you've got your country on a war footing, and there's a large amount of control and secrecy that is naturally accepted by the population. You start funneling money into trying to mitigate the risk. And that might include building lots of underground facilities. Weirdly, we see evidence of that. It includes loads and loads of secrecy and loads of attempts at control, and somehow defanging the nuclear threat if at all possible. Okay. Now, if at the same time you get introduced to non-human intelligences who are somewhat benevolent, but also very wary of the possibility that you might destroy yourselves because they may have seen that in other parts of the cosmos, to be honest, then what might they do? They might start giving you technologies to enable you to potentially catch weapons before they detonate. Say, let's say you get some of this anti-gravitic technology and you fly around at 10,000 Gs. If you're good with that stuff, as soon as you detect a launch of nukes, you can whiz over and you can laser them, maybe something like that, before they've even left Russian or Chinese airspace, whatever it is. And you only now start to have the problem of the kind of random dictators such as the North Koreans or whoever who happen to develop one or two nukes. Even just lobbing one nuke is enough to trigger the whole shebang. And clearly, your ability to do that, your ability perhaps to launch a preemptive first strike before your opponents can do anything at all, is something you want to keep extraordinary secrecy over. Yep. So that might explain why there is such a reticence to talk about it and to admit that the NHI are here. We have some evidence that we have that kind of technology. You recently, I can't remember when you had him, but did you have Michael Herrera on the podcast?
I've not had Michael Herrera, but I did talk about the whole Michael Herrera thing briefly with Dan.
Yes.
Because Joey is not my name, who's on the Discord. Talks about Michael quite a lot, and he had been on with UAP Gerb, I think it was, and it's something that's came up multiple times, hasn't it, in the Discord server? But yeah, that wasn't me, but I did discuss it.
I mean, fundamentally, Herrera saw what is an alien reproduction vehicle, and it seemed to be doing something probably nefarious. I mean, Michael Herrera has connections with Dr. Stephen Greer, and the evidence that he presents is sometimes questionable, but there's always going to be an element of truth to it. But, is it the whole case that they're doing people smuggling and drug smuggling or whatever else using these ARVs? I'm not sure about that. But it's certainly true. I certainly believe Michael Herrera when he says he saw what he saw. He seems very precise about that. And there are whistleblowers who such as David Grush, who have come out and said, we have this technology. We're actively trying to reverse engineer it. And colossal sums of money have gone into the military-industrial complex in America. I mean, trillions and trillions of dollars, and sort of disappeared. And it's like the toilet seats that cost $100 or whatever it is, and we need several thousand of those for various facilities around various locations. And it's that actually they go out to the local Walmart and buy a few for like $5 each or something, and then the money goes somewhere else. There's loads of ways and means in which they can take that money and they can make use of it, and they have been doing that since those days. We're talking about 70 or 80 years worth of massive expenditure. So where is that money going? If you're looking at the more woo kind of element of things, have you ever read any of the raw material?
I've read snippets, clips, bits of pages.
I know, because it's really tough to read, isn't it?
Not my bag, I suppose, but stuff that I've came across, yeah.
I mean, basically, you can take it or leave it on that. That is very woo, but it is it's extremely well thought through. If it is fabrication, it's extremely well thought through. And there's right at the very beginning, there's a conversation that happens between the questioner and the channeler about, what are these things whizzing about your skies? And this is in 1981, I suppose. And Ra comes back and says, well, they're yours. That you've got about 500 and something largely drone-based things whizzing around, which you have created, which your military-industrial complex has created. So already back then, you've got that kind of confirmation. So that, again, it's rather circumstantial evidence, but it's quite interesting evidence. And that also somewhat ties into the abduction thing. I just had this idea that why would there'd be so many abductions and so much harvesting of gametes, sperm and ova and so on from people. If not for the possibility that regardless of alien assistance and regardless of all the best intentions of the US military, you still, nuclear Armageddon happens. Well, you're going to try and preserve the human race by taking it off. And you might also be modifying the human race, because what we miss is maybe a natural empathy, a natural telepathy that enables us to intuitively know what the other person is saying or thinking or feeling. And as a result of that, we're pretty aggressive, and we respond inappropriately with our nukes at the wrong times in face of something that we don't understand, or something minor, or just an irritation of being cut up on the highway or something like that. So that's where I'm thinking, and I don't know, now that we're talking about disclosure, I don't know whether what has changed to enable it to be talked about more and more, except the possibility that just you can't keep a lid on it for 80 years without bits leaking out. And in particular, in this environment where we've got the internet, we've got communications between us and that are very, very rapid, and suddenly information bubbles up and you can't keep it under control anymore. That's my thought.
So it's a long thought, and that's
Yes.
doesn't disappoint with the questions you send in as well, and that makes sense now. So a couple of things kind of working backwards. In terms of abductions, I think more and more, if we as a species found we had the technology to go to other planets and observe another species, we wouldn't just land, in the middle of a city and say, "Hi, we are from another planet," etc., etc. I
Mm.
reckon we would very much do the same, where we would stalk them for a while and, dare I say, abduct one of theirs and just have a look and see what are these, etc., etc. Our military would do something pretty similar. I'm pretty sure. So the
Mm.
abduction thing, as horrible as it is, for some others talk about far more pleasant experiences, don't they? However, I think it's always easier to believe the bad stuff than the good side of it. So I can see how abductions we would potentially do the same. Um, the the secret tech stuff, though, talking a lot about nuclear weapons and secret technology, you're quite right. A lot of this goes back to, not exclusively, but the sightings really pick up when we start playing about with atomic weapons, nuclear energy.
Mm.
I think it's fair to say, in some way, we knocked on a door, or we let someone know that we'd found the toys. It's that
Mm.
analogy of the gorilla being stuck in the cage, isn't it? But the zookeeper drops the key, and the
Mm.
gorilla finds the key, but it's what do they do with it? At first, a key's a key to them. They don't know what it does, what its purpose is, its function. So they play with it, they smack it about, but then they get closer to the gate, and then one day do they see that it opens the gate? And I've used this analogy before, but are we that gorilla with the key? And they're looking to see how we use this technology. And right now, we've got a mix of, we use it for some good and
Mm.
some not so good, as we've seen, like a lot of destruction, but then a lot of really good energy purposes as well. So, Starfish, I was looking up when you were talking, the Starfish Prime test, for those who don't know, that was a high altitude nuclear test back in 1962. And they were basically blowing up thermonuclear warheads at height above the ocean. And some folks would say, as the story goes, that we knocked something out the sky either deliberately, or it was a consequence of the nuclear detonation at height, and we potentially recovered it, etc., etc. So I don't doubt there's a massive connection between us finding the nukes and that technology, how they power their craft potentially, how we could power craft potentially, and also how not necessarily combat these things. I don't know if that's. I think of the Independence Day, part of the movie. Spoilers
Yes.
alert, folks, but it's been 25 years, so come on, 30 years nearly. That they try and attack the big mothership with a nuke, and it does absolutely nothing
Mm.
except destroy a little bit of our land. So, I reckon the nuclear side of things is of interest to whatever these objects are. I think more and more objects like the Tic Tac are really advanced drones. I don't
Yeah.
think they're human. And I think that's why they sit and watch these nuclear powered carrier strike groups, because they are literally attracted to this mass of nuclear energy powering these ships, any
Mm.
potential nuclear weapons that they may house. I don't doubt that's why there's so many of these things underwater as well, following nuclear submarines left, right, and centre. So I'm all for that kind of chat and conversation. What I do think though, and you mentioned us right back at the start to walk it way back, if we have, for example, the Tic Tacs are ours as in humans, right? And let's just say they belong to the US.
Hmm.
If you could really crudely put nuclear weapons on those as a payload, you could be at the speeds these things travel anywhere on the planet within minutes.
Yes.
So you would imagine that if China and Russia don't have that technology, then the US win, for example, because as soon as you try to launch anything, the US would be above every major city and all those places within minutes because they have this tic tac technology. So that's what makes me think that it's not US, not Russian, not Chinese, that it is definitely something else.
Well,
Thoughts on that?
I have to say that it's both. So I'm largely convinced that there's some sort of quarantine around our planet, and that there's a lot of observation. In
Hmm.
particular, the attraction between, let's say, carrier groups and Tic Tacs is because maybe they're very nervous about us inadvertently triggering something which then results in nuclear war, because it doesn't take very much.
Yeah.
If you see that Annie Jacobson interview, it's like well, I can't remember the number, but it's something like 37 minutes, and then that's it. 5 billion people are dead,
Yeah.
And if you've got a nuclear sub, which is only with a few minutes away from the coast of America and is undetectable, but can launch a few nukes, or indeed you have your mad North Korean dictator who just lobs one across, with their intercontinental ballistic missile. It might not
Hmm.
reach its destination, but it might still trigger the nukes. So I think that the non-human intelligences are monitoring everything, because there could be an accident, and that doesn't prevent us humans from having developed something that we can do similar things with. And perhaps the Americans would rather that Russians didn't know that they do have the ability to basically drop a nuke on Moscow if they decided to. Of course, you then have the moral issue of, have I just wiped out large portions of humanity literally to dominate the planet and to prevent the total destruction of the planet? That's the kind of moral argument. That the Russians don't like you and have nukes, so maybe you should just wipe them all out. And I'm sure people have had those conversations. But again, I don't think it would be looked at kindly by the rest of the galaxy, as let alone by the rest, whoever remains in humanity, to say, why did you choose to do this? Because we were already hugely upset at the use of nuclear weapons in the war in Japan.
Let me ask then, though, for the last few minutes, okay, Peter? And this is something that's a difficult question to answer, like many in this subject, but I want your opinion. Why, if we are being observed, why, if there are at least one species or multiple species looking at our planet and what we are doing, why didn't they stop Hiroshima, Nagasaki, any number of the nuclear disasters? Why didn't they stop the Chernobyl disaster? Why didn't they stop or don't stop any number of nuclear tests carried out on a weekly basis around the planet? Why did they let those go on?
Sure, good question. And I can only surmise that for the most part they don't they collaborate with us, and not revealing the fact that they can prevent it, because part of the issue that we have is that the stability on our planet is driven by mutually assured destruction. So if it looks like our nukes are ineffectual, because as soon as we launch one, they're going to come swooping in and zap it or whatever it is, it's just, I know that's a bit. I'm hoping for that. I'm hoping that
Yeah.
does exactly exist, But assuming that was the case, and we all kind of understood that, then maybe we might become more belligerent. We might be a little bit more aggressive with conventional weapons, or non-nuclear but really nasty weapons like chemical, biological weapons,
Mm.
in an attempt to assert our dominance on the rest of the world. Um, so for that purpose, they have to they have to make a decision. Do we other than just kind of fly around a bit and make ourselves visible, or otherwise inadvertently be captured in some way, shape, or form as we're doing whatever we're doing, then we try and keep ourselves concealed and our capabilities concealed.
Peter, very quick question to finish off with.
Mm.
What are you expecting from the upcoming book from Lou Elizondo, imminent?
Oh, do you know what? I've heard rumors, and there was some argument about whether or not some of it had been leaked. I haven't seen the leaked copy, but I have got an advanced copy on order. I think I think he has had some training in stuff like remote viewing and other stuff, and he's been using that, and he's going to announce some of that. I think that he's going to talk about he's not only been able to, through normal investigative means, identify the fact that there are non-human intelligences, that we're aware of what they're doing, that we can monitor them, we can attract them to locations and stuff like that, but also that he's able to view that because he's a remote viewer himself. I think there's something along those lines, because I think it's probably a bit more common than we think that people would try and get that kind of intuitive sense that they get through RV training of what's actually happening.
Interesting. Well, listen, Peter, genuinely want to say thank you to you while we're recording for all the questions you send in, the support,
That's right.
the correspondence. We always joke about it, don't we, on the Discord especially? Peter
Yeah.
sent in 50 questions, but it's massively appreciated. So, yeah, thank you very much from me.
You're very welcome, and I appreciate the podcast. It's fantastic.
We move now to Washington, and I have the president of Chickenlandia making what I think is her second appearance on the listener
Yes.
call-in. I don't think it's third yet. I've got Dahlia. Dahlia, welcome.
Thank you for having me. It's always great to chat with you, Andy.
And it's wonderful to speak to someone with such a good quality microphone. And you've got a better voice for podcasting than I do as well. So that's always wonderfully comforting for me to experience.
Yeah, if there's any chicken keepers out there, I don't know how much crossover there is between like the UFO world and and the chicken
So
keeping world.
you've
But
got the chicken coop that's a UFO shape, don't you?
no, I wish I
No.
did.
Or did you send me that, or did someone
I
send me a
did.
picture of?
I'm sure it's just a GIF. Like I'm
Yeah,
sure I
right.
sent you the
Okay.
GIF.
Okay, yeah. Maybe I thought you actually had that then. So you're not
That
as
would be
cool anymore.
cool.
But listen, Dahlia, lot to talk about. So the floor is yours. On you go.
Oh gosh. Okay, so first I just want to start out by saying I'm really nervous talking about this because I want to communicate it correctly because I feel a little bit vulnerable talking about it.
Cool.
Um I guess just, from the beginning, since I was a kid, I've been interested in UFOs. Started out being really scared of them. And then as an adult, now I've always kind of had like a superficial interest in them, meaning I feel like, especially now that I'm kind of like on the outside looking in.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and what interested me initially was like the personal accounts, like Travis Walton, Betty and Barney Hill, stuff
Mm-hmm.
like that. I have found very interesting, and I've also found believable. Many of them very believable. Um, I'm not saying that it's like evidence, but personally, I believe a lot of these stories because mainly I just don't know like what especially Betty and Barney Hill, like what in their climate, like what did they have to gain from that?
100%.
And
And
Travis Walton doesn't really seem like a grandiose guy, like you
just
know.
on the Betty and Barney Hill, for anyone who isn't familiar, what you're talking about there is the fact that in the 60s you had a black male, a white female as a couple, and that was a whole lot of issues for them. They
Yes.
did not have an easy time together, and to come out and basically say you had been abducted by aliens is not the thing you don't bring attention to yourself in that
Yeah.
time as a couple with anything, let alone claim an abduction experience. So just for anyone wondering what you meant, but yeah, I think that's huge.
Yeah, I just found that really fascinating. And then in 2020, COVID hit. I didn't have anything to do, and I fell very deep into the rabbit hole, like the UAP rabbit hole. And I didn't have like I just wasn't interested in that side of things before that. And in fact, I
Mm-hmm.
think until 2017, it just really wasn't as, I guess, like mainstream as it is now. So then I started listening to you. I started listening to Ryan and getting more and more into it and hearing a lot from like ex-intelligence, people coming out of that arena.
Yeah.
And I remember listening to, it was a podcast. I cannot remember who it was because I swear, like, I can't keep everyone's names.
I don't blame you. I'm the same. Don't worry.
It's a lot of guys. I don't remember their
Yeah.
names. But there was a former, I'm pretty sure, former CIA guy, and he was on your channel. And at one point, he was talking, and he was talking about how people have doubts or they don't believe or whatever. And he said, we're the good guys. And just to give you some background, my family is from Guatemala.
Mm.
I am very familiar with the CIA and their actions as an institution around the world.
Yeah.
What they've been involved in. And so for him, when he said that, I was just like, okay, this is what's really bothering me about the whole discussion, is that I feel like there's this entitlement from a lot of these guys. And I'm not saying that they're lying or whatever, but I feel like with some of them, there's a sense of entitlement that we should believe what they're saying. And certainly, like, if you go, in UFO Twitter, I've seen it, which can get pretty brutal. But I feel like there's a few different camps, and there's a lot of people that just don't believe some of the things that are coming from this part of the discussion.
Mm-hmm.
And as someone that falls in that category, just because I'm naturally distrustful of folks that are involved with have had any involvement with the CIA. And if listeners don't know, in Latin America, there's been a lot of, the CIA has been very involved with some really awful things. And, I just feel like that trust needs to be earned. And I feel like if I say these things on Twitter, if I voice my doubts on Twitter, I'm kind of put into this category. Maybe, especially in the United States, people would assume something about me politically. If I voice these doubts, and that's not the case. It's just that from my standpoint, my family has been directly affected by a lot of the lies that have been told out of this agency and a lot of their actions. And so I just am like, I see, and Grush is like, he's very believable, and I do, like, he's probably one of the ones that I'm like, I feel like he's really telling the truth. But then on the other hand, I'm like, why is he being allowed to say this? And why would we even be getting this information if there wasn't some agenda attached to it, considering where this information is coming from? So I guess I kind of just want to stick up for the skeptical people, when it comes to some of these voices, that are in the conversation, because I think we get painted a certain way, and it's not always the same reason. There's different reasons for the distrust. I really feel like my reason is a pretty good one. I'm very, very skeptical of some of these voices.
Yeah. And you said to me you were worried about putting that across eloquently. I thought you've done it really well. So for me, trying to be half as eloquent back to you in my response, I suppose I've said, from a personal point of view, if we take David Grush, for many right now, is someone they pin a lot of hopes on. So I believe David Grush. However, I've never put all my eggs in one basket. There may be people's baskets I'm filling right now with, I'm on this guy's train, or I'm on this girl's train, or whatever it might be, because of what they said, what they've done. They're the figure at the time that you're kind of following. But I'm very prepared, and maybe I'm just naturally pessimistic with this kind of stuff, that at any one time, one or many of these folks could let you down. So
Yeah.
to say David Grush is the guy, or even to go back further, Louis Elizondo, who was the Grush before Grush, if we're going along that way, if it came out one day, and I don't believe this to be true, but I'm just making my point that Louis Elizondo was lying. It was all a psyop. It was a big CIA psyop, and it was actually to get funding for black budget tech because Chinese drones had become so sophisticated that the US military were struggling to keep up with them. And that's where the whole UFO thing came from, right? I'd be disappointed. I'd be a little shocked. But there would be part of me that would go, okay, yep.
Yeah.
Is that really that unexpected, given the background, the nature of this topic, what these folks done before, good and bad? I think I've just got that natural side to me that nothing really shocks me. I wouldn't walk away from the topic. I've had my own sighting. I never call it an experience. I don't think that would be fair to true
I love the way you
experiencers.
say experience, though, and that's my
It's
ringtone.
yeah, thanks. Is it actually?
You sent me the it's not actually
Oh,
the what is it from Close Encounters of the Third Kind?
yeah.
That's my ringtone.
The do
But
do do do.
you sent me yourself saying experiencer a whole
Not
bunch of times.
Yeah, so that's not because I just send people stuff randomly.
Yeah.
I'm not creepy like that. I was
I
asked by a
asked
listener today.
specifically.
Yeah, a listener, Michael, sent me today, could I please say purple burglar alarm? And I responded back with a voice note. And if that makes someone's day, then brilliant. So I get those requests. But my point
Yeah.
being, Odalia, that I've had a sighting, the Ferris wheel thing. So if I find that Gary Nolan, Lou Elizondo, Stephen Greer, anyone you want to associate with the UFO topic, turns out they are all lying for whatever reason, and it wasn't true. Jim Semivan might be the guy you're thinking of, because he was ex-CIA, and I spoke to him. If they're all not telling the truth and they've got no interest in actual UFOs, it wouldn't put me off as much as it would disappoint me, because it's that whole thing of, I remember what I saw. I know what I saw. I saw something incredible. And I'm sure Betty and Barney Hill, had they still been alive, would have said the same thing.
Yeah.
Travis Walton would say the same thing. Calvin Parker, had he still been alive, would say the same thing, that they don't need what's happening now for them to justify that there's something going on which is truly non-human, extraterrestrial. But to your point, even someone neutral coming into this, and you say, oh, well, this guy from the CIA says there's aliens. Well, don't they lie? Tom DeLonge in his own song says, I know the CIA would say all you hear is all hearsay.
Yeah.
So, and that is now Tom DeLonge working with Jim Semivan, ex-CIA, together into the
Yeah.
stars. So for me, I've got a note here. It must be difficult given, like you say, your own experience, but you have to sort of try and separate the person or the small group from the institution,
Yes.
and accept that maybe, or actually not maybe, it's probably likely there are some good folks within that organization who aren't bought into the ethos of the overall, or the the myth of a whole organization, what they're about, what they used to stand for or do stand for. And actually, there are some people that may work there, but they have kids, they have partners, they have good intentions. It's a hard one to weigh up.
Yeah, and I get that everybody that works there is a human being, and that they're probably just trying to survive like all of us. I do question, just knowing just what the CIA has been involved in, and deciding that that is the organization you want to work for. Like, I mean, that casts a lot of doubt into my mind about how trustworthy that person is. I can't help it. Um
Do you think there's an element though with that of, and again, someone working, and I don't know the route into the CIA, for example, right? I'm sure there's folks out there who think I work for them. I, I'm sure the paychecks would be good, and that's going to be my point here. Actually, is that if you work your way through early law enforcement or army, whatever it may be, and then you get offered a position in an organization like the CIA. And I'm thinking like Will Smith Men in Black style, where you're approached because you have a particular skill
Yeah.
set or you're top
A
of something.
particular set of skills. Yeah.
Yeah, and very Liam Neeson. And someone
Yes.
says to you, Dahlia, we're really impressed with Chickenlandia, and we know you're making $50,000 a year, but you've got kids, you've got a family, and you're having to put food on the table. And we want you to come and run the CIA's chicken coop, and it's going to be $500,000 a year. There are a lot of folks that would be like, who maybe don't even have a history with them personally, that would be like, I can't say no to the opportunity, the pension,
Yeah.
the insurance, the money, even the prestige that then comes with it. To
Yeah.
use even like a poorer example, I support a certain football team in Glasgow, and it's almost like sacrilege to play for the other if you support one of them as a player.
Yeah.
Some have done it, but if you play for the blue team and you get £5,000 a week, and the green team offer you £50,000 a week, you're kind of stupid to not take the money.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, and I
I
get
get
that.
that.
And I think there's certainly probably people that don't know the scope of what what that organization has been involved in, and what they perpetuated across the world.
I
And I do
certainly
want to
don't.
say,
Like I don't, but I know bits of what you're getting at from
yeah.
reading various books and whatnot over the years, and various aspects of government have done. I read a book on it was, and the CIA were heavily involved. It was experiments governments around the world or organizations within governments have done to their own people, and it
Yeah.
was like psychedelics and whatnot, and drugging and people dying,
Yes.
and
Yeah, and I even just the kind of rebranding, like the whole UAP thing versus like UFO, it's almost like a rebranding of the subject, where
mm,
you think of it, you hear UAP, and it's more, you think of things in more of like a militaristic terms. At least that's how I view it. And
yeah.
so I'm like, okay, where are we being lead? I sound like such a conspiracy theorist right now. But I'm like, how are they trying to like shape the way we think about this? Because I just don't think that any information is going to come out without them being in a lot of control over how we're receiving it. And I
So
do want to say that it doesn't in any way make me less. I mean, I do believe from my own experiences that there is a phenomenon happening. I
mhm.
know that, I can't prove it, but I know that. I guess I kind of mourn. I feel like we've lost a bit of the human aspect of it, and we've put a lot of focus on on the military sightings and not all of them, because uh, just more of like the whistleblower kind of stuff, and we're not focusing as much on the personal accounts, and
Let me ask, when you say we, is there, and this is me doing like almost like a therapist thing, when you
yeah,
say,
do it. I need
when you
therapy.
yeah, when when you're saying that'll cost you, we are not focusing on this. Is there an element of that you aren't focusing on that as much, and that you pay more attention to that?
Maybe it is, but I feel like that's, I mean, if you go onto UFO Twitter, which is what I'm seeing, it's the exposure that I have,
Yeah,
that's what you're going to see the most of. Now, if I
100%.
went
Yeah,
into like more of the experiencer arenas, then it would be a different kind of focus, but they're just not taken as seriously.
no.
And so the mainstream focus, I think, has really shifted more into the whole whistleblower thing and the testimony and all that, which I find very interesting. I just am, I'm just taking it all with a grain of salt, a big fat grain of salt.
Yeah, so I've just said on the breakdown I recorded, when this comes out, it'll have been a few days ago it came out, the breakdown. Um, People get in touch with me, Dahlia, who have listened to the podcast. It's been going just over 4 years now, and you've been listening to it for a while, so thanks.
Yes.
For some reason, but people get in touch and they'll tell me, Andy, I've been interested in UFOs for 20 years, 30 years, 5 months, 2 weeks, whatever it might be. And I've got no interest really in what's happening now. They don't care really about
Yeah.
Grush,
Yeah.
Nell, Elizondo, the government, NDAA, UAP Disclosure Act. They don't care. It doesn't do anything for them. But they love the history of the subject. They love hearing experiencer accounts. There are people who love these call-ins because they hear people like them talking about the UFO subject, which
Yeah.
I hope the podcast is anyway, because I'm just that. But they like the history. They like the personal side of it. They like hearing Terry Lovelace talk about Devil's Den. They like hearing Calvin Parker talk about Pascagoula. They like hearing new authors digging into old subjects and talking about old cases and doing new research, because for them, that's enough. For them,
Yeah.
the phenomenon's real. They know there's a phenomenon there. They don't need, and it's quite an interesting niche, really, isn't it? That they don't need the US government to come out and say there is something happening. We are approving of this almost.
Yeah. I mean, to me, that's almost like that makes it less believable.
Because you're going to question, okay, so why
Yeah.
now? Like you say, why
Yeah.
now? Why is he allowed to say this? Why is she allowed to do that? Why are they coming up? Is it an agenda? Are they controlling a narrative? Is something making them do it? All valid questions, but it doesn't mean you can't dive in. I've done a bit of that recently. I spend a lot less time on social media, and I've tried to spend a few months looking at some of the older stuff, and there's some really interesting cases.
Yeah.
Things I didn't know, looking into the background of subjects. And there's a whole group of people out there, Dahlia, like you, who are like, I don't really care about what's going on now. I don't necessarily trust this, but there's a whole history to the subject that they still love. And I think what the issue is, maybe for someone like yourself who feels this, that's being overlooked, because that's still going on now. People are still having sightings. People are still seeing things. There are still abductions. That doesn't go away, but you hear less about it because it's drowned out by the in thing right now. And the buzzword is whistleblower hearings,
Yeah.
US Congress. That's what's happening. But it'll be something else in 10 years and something else in 10 years, unless we get the full-on proper disclosure by that point.
Yeah. I feel like I want the disclosure to come out of the people, to
Yeah.
come from us, and for that to be the focus. And but we'll see how everything plays out. It's definitely interesting. It's definitely like things happening every now I think a lot of people, because there's just so much going on in the world, um it's kind of slowed down a little bit, just the news cycles on the whole UAP thing. But at least from where I am, because I'm not like
Yeah.
constantly researching. Um but yeah, um I'm just waiting for the aliens to come and help us with this planet we got. you
Well,
know.
I think we need a whole lot more than just aliens to help us with this planet right now. And I know you've gone over your time because you've got things to do, but one
Yeah.
thing I want to ask you before you go,
Yeah.
Louise Elizondo's book's coming out. Are you going to be getting it, and any
No.
expectations from it? No?
You know what? I shouldn't say that.
No, you should, be honest.
I I probably won't. I do get a feeling from him of that. And it may just be me. Like, I obviously I have a bias. Like, there's
Mm,
obviously some personal stuff going on there. Um, but I kind of feel like he's kind of in that camp where he feels entitled um, to being believed, and I don't know that he's really earned that trust at least from me yet. But then I should probably read the book if I'm going to be making a claim like that. So I'm just being
that's
really,
fair.
really honest.
No,
I'm
and do
probably
you know
won't.
what? Knowing him a little bit, I'm sure Luis Elizondo himself would respect that a lot more than anyone blowing smoke up his arse, which he gets a lot of. So, yeah. Dahlia, awesome to speak with you, and do make sure you're back on the next one, won't you?
I will. Always happy to talk to you.
Moving on now, we head to Texas, where I've got Chase calling. Chase, how are we?
Doing well, Andy. Thanks.
Good to have you. Good to speak finally, face to face, or for the purpose of the call in, it's audio only. So really good to finally have you on, Chase. You're one of the many listeners who I converse with quite regular. I'd like to think on email and whatnot. So it's always good to hear from you, especially getting you onto the call in as well. So listen, so far we've had listeners talking about UFOs and the nuclear connection. We've had the distrust in the CIA from another listener, and that's got like a kind of historical background for them, which was fair. And what is it you want to talk about? The floor is yours.
Yeah, for me, I grew up as a military brat and in the Air Force and spent most of my time growing up overseas. My dad was a military fighter pilot, commanded the aggressor squadron for a little while, was a wing commander, and commanded Space Command. And so I know that there's a whole generation of people like me who grew up in the military, who heard and saw things with our parents in their jobs and their calls and their communications that there's probably some information out there. I definitely heard some things that made me question things even when I was in high school. And the older I've gotten, and then when my father finally retired, I've tried to get him to talk about it. And so for me, it's how do we get this whole generation of kids whose parents know a lot more than they are saying to open up and share their stories with us? And how can we then get those stories up and shared out to more people? So that's kind of what I'm thinking. There's this entire generation of kids who, if we could get our parents to talk, could unlock a lot of doors for the phenomenon, the topic.
If you don't mind me asking, what kind of time period are we talking about where your father was in active service?
When I was growing up in Germany, this was 80, actually would have been 78 through 87. And I know there's a lot of other kids that were in military bases, on military bases in Germany. And for example, at the time, my dad was an F-15 fighter pilot, and I grew up in West Germany, right? And we actually took a trip once and drove our Volkswagen van from West Germany through East Germany, having to stop at all the Russian military points along the way, the East German points, and be inspected. But as part of that there was things that I heard in those conversations, and I know other kids have heard, um, and other things that our parents know, that if we could get them to talk, I think we could learn a lot. And one of the ways I think that the military keeps a finger on that is, for example, my dad, as a retired general, they bring them in every once in a while to a military base here in Texas, all the retired generals, and they brief them on what's going on in the world, and they ask for advice, and they look for patterns, historical things like that. And I believe one of the reasons they do that is because if they talk, they lose their clearance and they then are no longer invited
Mm.
to those briefings. So, yeah, I think there's a lot of information out there that if we could get our parents to talk, we could learn a lot.
Chase, how long have you been listening to the podcast?
I picked up during the pandemic, maybe a couple of years.
Okay. So, I mean, it started May 2020, so that's fine. So pretty early on, to be fair. And you must have heard interviews with me speaking to individuals, or even other UFO podcasts or other podcasts you listen to, and you hear someone, a guest, will say something, and you must be screaming at the interviewer to follow up on it and go, ask them, ask them, ask them. Now you are that guy, because what I have to ask you is, you've said a few times, we hear things, or we have heard things over the years. So what kind of stories are you hearing that you wish you knew more about?
There was an investigation in Germany at one point, and I can't remember the year, but I was in early high school. And I remember a conversation where my dad picked up a secure phone and was talking to someone, and they said, um, like the concept was you need to get out here right away. And there was some sort of investigation that he was on for like a week, 10 days, and he would never talk about it, never said anything else about it. I've asked him about it several times. He won't say anything about it. It wasn't in England, it was in Germany. Um, and it was during a time when there were quite a few F-15 crashes or downings or ejections. And so I don't know if any of that was related, but that was one of the times. The other time he was wing commander in Alaska, and I was there between semesters of college over the winter, and it was the middle of the night. They got a call. He had to get up, get dressed, and leave. And there was again an investigation that he was a part of for several days. that it could have been completely prosaic. It could have been something with the
Mm.
Russians, but it was definitely something he wouldn't talk about. And it didn't seem like the other times that I've talked, when I've asked him and he said, "Oh, we had an incursion, we had to investigate," he wouldn't say anything about it. So, yeah, I don't know if there's anything there. But when he was commander of Space Command and we went on the tour, we went inside Cheyenne Mountain, we got to see what they can see, some of it. And there's just things I know, conversations I've just heard snippets of where I know he knows a lot more than he's saying. And I know other friends of mine whose parents are in similar situations feel the same way.
What kind of stuff have you heard then from friends whose parents are in similar situations? And again, appreciate that they've got security clearances. They, even your kids, you can't tell everything. Your kids hear snippets, or they may hear, almost speaking in riddles. I'm sure at times kind of came across. But what sort of stuff did you hear from them?
A friend of mine, when we were living in Ramstein, Germany, his dad worked for the OSI, Office of Special Investigations for the Air Force. And there was a couple of times where he told me his dad would go for a couple weeks and he didn't pack military clothing. He didn't bring his uniforms. He was packing regular stuff. So I don't know. Again, it could have been a different type of training, but it was one of those ones where he's like, "My dad is going on this weird trip. I don't know," and he wouldn't talk about it when he got back. And so, again, it's just one of those things.
Did your dad ever have any interest in UFOs outside of, obviously the military and whatnot? Movies as a kid growing up, did he ever talk about it?
Not at all. No, he would laugh, and to this day he'll say, because he's still alive, and he'll be like, there's nothing to see here. There's nothing out there, and he'll mostly laugh. But when I ask him a direct question, or when I bring up certain things about some of the more current topics, he'll look at me real serious. He'll listen very carefully, and then he'll laugh, and he'll be like, nah, there's nothing there. Or he'll say, the Air Force is so badly organized that there's no way they could keep a secret like that.
Yeah, I mean that's a pretty common way of thinking about it, isn't it? And I suppose it's either true or a way to keep the secret alive, or maybe it's a bit of both. Maybe it is badly organized. Like, I think every organization, if anyone listening to this works in any kind of office setup. I work for a pretty big company here in the UK. Nothing top secret or anything, but they're a really big company. They aren't well organized from the top down, and things are just getting worse. So you can see people who are in positions where they are paid seven-figure salaries and high six-figure salaries, even down to the low six figures, who are pretty incompetent in roles where you think, oh my God, how are they in that position? I imagine that translates throughout governments worldwide, throughout politics worldwide, and militaries worldwide as well. Does that sound fair?
It does. It does. I mean, I work for a very large tech company, and secrecy where I work is paramount, and it's very well kept. And so I imagine when and where it's needed to be, it absolutely is. I think it's part of the um I think it's part of the story. I think it's part of the pattern, is just to keep everybody thinking, "Oh, they're disorganized. They couldn't keep a secret." When in fact, I think they're keeping a lot of secrets.
So, in terms of military kids, of which you are one, how do you think you bring those kids into the conversation? Because one, and as morbid a way as it may be of thinking about it, if those kids' parents are eventually going to pass on, they're taking that information with them. And actually, something I talked about on the breakdown with Dan was the whole dead man switch thing.
Yeah.
That you've got journalists, investigative documentary makers, and whatnot out there with tons of information that they could choose to keep to themselves, and they are right now. But if and when they pass on, or if something were to happen, for example, to a Ross Coulthart, a lot of his information gets released. What do you say to that sort of, thing for your parents and parents of other military kids?
Yeah, I think there's two really important things. I think the first is we need to find a way to get them to talk. And I think one of the ways is just, first of all, educating more kids like me, more, kids, more people who have grown up as children in the military, uh, to the fact that they probably do know a lot more than they have talked about in the past, and that they grew up during this era when it was incredibly threatening and dangerous to share. So I think just making us aware of it is the first thing. The second is, um, talking to them before they pass, I agree. I think that's a big deal, especially if people have parents who are not being held bound by security clearances and things like that. Ask them, talk to them, get them to open up, record them, have the conversations. And then the other part is, I've had friends whose parents have passed, and I said, "Well, what did you do with their stuff?" "Oh no, we just trashed it all." And I was like, "Oh my gosh, I'm gonna go through all my dad's stuff when, when eventually he does pass. I'm gonna go through everything because he's got videotapes and documents that there's probably nothing there, but there might be. So it's worth looking and worth having the conversation. And then if we find something, sharing it. Making sure that we escalate it and open it up to other people to look at."
Do you think there's an element, if someone like your father or anyone else's parents who were in the military knew information above and beyond what you would expect or we know, which they would, they keep that to themselves for a reason, especially having a family. They don't want you knowing certain things for your own safety.
Oh, for sure. My dad was at the Pentagon on 9/11. Well, was supposed to be there. He was working there and was stationed there, but he didn't go in that day. And so that was after that happened with all of the terrorism and the follow up things. When he moved here to Texas, we literally had to make sure he was not. His address wasn't published. That there were none of his online media things were available because literally he was getting threats here in Texas of personal harm. And so I totally understand why some of that has to be that way. But I do think that the longer it goes on, we start to run the risk of losing that information if we don't talk to them.
Couple of things before we finish up, Chase, because that's really interesting. Thanks for that. And it keeps. I enjoy when we get these call-ins, and there's a different breadth of things people are bringing up, which always helps. Lou Elizondo's book is due out in the next couple of weeks. I wonder, are you going to be getting the book? Are you pre-ordering it? And what are your expectations?
Oh my gosh, I'm so excited about this book. I was listening to your omnibus yesterday on the walk with the dog again with him, listening just to try to pick anything up and hear. It's so funny. Listening to him is so much like listening to my dad and his friends. It's very comfortable, and the way they talk is so similar. That yeah, I'm super excited about the book. I pre-ordered it. I've been sharing it with I founded a UFO club at work, and I've been sharing it out, saying, we need to read this. But yeah, I'm hoping that that's one of those examples where people who grew up like I did will see and hear those kinds of echoes, and maybe, think about what are the stories I should ask about, what are the questions I should ask my parents or my friends. I mean, because there's plenty of, people my age who have friends, and I've talked to my friends and asked them, and that's where I found out the story about my friend whose dad was in the OSI. I didn't know that, when we were growing up. And so it was just like, the more we talk about it, the more I think we'll find out, we'll come out, and then we'll be able to open up new leads for people like Ross and other people to investigate.
Do you think your father will have an interest in the book?
That's a really good question. You know what? I'm going to read it, and then I'm going to bring it to him, and then I'll see if he reads it. I hope he does. Maybe he will, being former Pentagon as well. He might be
Yeah.
willing to open it up. So yeah.
Yeah, I'd be interested to know that. Even someone who kind of laughs off the subject, but he'll appreciate Lou Elizondo's background, the roles he's held, and surely, if he's got any inkling or interest in anything remotely involved in this subject, he's going to look at that and raise an eyebrow and go, "Well, this guy must have something to say." So that'd be interesting to me. And one more question, Chase, I want to ask you on the members only content that will be coming up in the next kind of week or two for August.
Mhm.
I'm asking a few different questions, and I've got people to send me them in. And I'm going to ask you one of those. So one of the questions I'm asking was, what one question, if you could have it answered right now regarding the UFO phenomenon, would you want to know? If you could get 100%, here's the answer. What would the question be?
That's a really good question. I think for me, having been raised Catholic, and I'm not Catholic now, but having been raised Catholic and having a family, my very first question is there anything I can do to protect my family against any potential harm? And whether there was any intended or not. That would be my first question. It wouldn't be the first one I'd want to ask, but it'd be the first one I would ask as a dad and a husband.
Yeah, very fair, and I can appreciate that as well. So definitely, Chase, awesome speaking to you finally. Thank you so much for calling in. And in a couple of months when we do another one of these, it'd be good to hear from you to hear if your dad has indeed picked up and read the Luella Zondo book or not.
Sounds great. I love it. Thanks for the time.
That is all for this episode. Thank you very much for tuning in. Don't forget to leave the podcast a review on your chosen platform. Apple and Spotify do make a huge difference to the algorithm. If you're checking the show out on YouTube, please don't forget to like and leave a comment on here as well. Any sharing you do is very much appreciated on any social media platform. And finally, you can listen to shows ad-free and sponsor-free in their glorious full versions by subscribing for less than the price of a coffee on Apple, Spotify. Just search That UFO Podcast Premium. YouTube, you can sign up and be a member, or you can do that through Patreon.com. Thank you very much for listening, folks.
It wasn't a tic-tac and not quite a saucer, more like a hubcap designed by Chaucer, a little baroque and quite steampunk, like Alice was playing bass for the Parliament of Folk. The little fucker hovered right outside of my window, and when I shoved out the screen, he made it an issue. I don't